It's 1997, you're 9 years old, you're at your friend's house, you have 4-player GoldenEye slappers only loaded up, and your friend's mom just ordered pizza. Little did you know, this was the best that life was ever going to get. Sorry, honey. Don't you miss when games were just games, and you would just play them instead of watching neckbeards play them and analyze them on third-party social media websites? Yeah, I know, it was boring. I mean, you couldn't even pay money at every possible opportunity to not play the game you apparently love playing. Well, apparently you're not alone. Hey guys, what's up? Mad Season here, back with another video for you. And today we have a video by Roten. One of you guys linked me this, and I wanted to check it out. Let's see why he misses when World of Warcraft was just a game.
I miss when World of Warcraft was just a game to me. In fact, I missed when most games were just games. I was reminded of this last night while playing Quest 64, an old Nintendo 64 game. There's barely any direction, there's no objectives, and there's a ton of rooms and corridors and hallways that just lead nowhere. It annoyed me at first. I would say stuff like, why would the developers put that there if it has no purpose? Or I'd say something like, that's bad game design. But then I did some reflection. There was a day before good game design, when games weren't designed to keep you engaged, or keep your dopamine levels high, or give you constant breadcrumb rewards. There was a day when they were just games, to play without purpose just for fun, almost like playing pretend when you were a kid. So why did the developers put that empty hallway there? Well, because someone may just want to explore around for fun. How about that? Playing a game for the fun of it.
What a casual. No, he's right. Games these days are more goal-oriented than they've ever been, to the point to where, in some cases, it's almost like a second job, particularly within the MMO genre. It's kind of funny if you think about it, but games were, of course, first created for leisure, something to distract you, to have direction, but not urgency. If you didn't play, aside from maybe missing bragging rights to your friends group for being the first to beat Contra without cheat codes, there really wasn't any pressure to complete tasks in a timely manner, and I think this is really where MMORPGs have sort of lost the plot. It's a genre of game that's always had some sort of inherent pressure to play due to its multiplayer nature. Character progression is always relative. You never wanted to fall behind in levels with your friends because then you wouldn't be able to do the fun things that they were doing, and you wanted to have relatively good gear to open up more options for guild recruitment. But over time, it's gotten more and more intense, and it's sort of gone into a direction where you aren't really rewarded for playing as much as you are punished for not playing. And I think that part of that has to do with the genre itself, but also the increasingly goal-oriented gaming industry at large. I think you can still get this from indie. AAA, not so much, but there used to be a time where something could just exist that didn't really have this tangible reward, such as experience, an achievement, an item, or whatever form of progression that the genre of game you're playing demands. It just simply existed for the sake of existing. And the world of exploration he's using here as an example is right on the money, because it happens to shine in the MMO genre. There's spots and nooks and crannies all over the game. Personally, one of my most memorable moments was just kind of exploring in Duskwood and happening upon that little grove in the eastern end with the Dark Portal statues. Now, this area had no actual purpose, from what I recall at least, but uncovering it always stuck with me. It's like, this is kind of out of place. What's this place for? What are these cool statues? I can't find it on YouTube because YouTube doesn't exist. Am I the first to find it? What's this grave for? It's one of my most vivid memories, and I'm sure many of you guys have similar stories with other spots. Probably without the incest, I'd have to guess. Or maybe not, but regardless, how can you say that moments like this don't provide value? The fact that we remember these moments like 20 years later, I think speaks for itself. So I do think that the goal-oriented climate of all games, not just MMOs, have really lost sight of this stop and smell the roses appeal that they used to have. I feel like if World of Warcraft were released today and you had a spot like this, due to the fact that you don't get experience for finding it, there's no achievement that pops up when you enter it, or any sort of reward for exploring it, people would just say, it's a waste of time. What's the point? Where's the shiny?
I used to feel the same way about World of Warcraft. Nowadays, I care about item levels, I care about rating, I care about new content and the best talent builds and the top classes and the top specs and the next patch and the buffs and the nerfs. And even Blizzard seems to have adapted to this style of thinking, making every new zone and raid high octane and high priority in the storyline. There's no time anymore to just relax and play. But it wasn't always like this. When I first started playing World of Warcraft in 2006, I was a dwarf.
I've been saying this more and more lately. One of the reasons why I like classic WoW isn't necessarily for what it has, it's what it doesn't have. To me, it's very representative of that old saying, there's a beauty in simplicity. It doesn't have all of this busy work. It doesn't have this laundry list of dailies and weeklies that you have to keep up with. It's still definitely goal-oriented, but it's lacking a lot of the pressure that you see in the current game. And I think it sort of turned it into a second job almost, where you play not necessarily because you want to, but because you're compelled to. At least that's the way that I feel. I mean, both versions are extremely time consuming, don't get me wrong, but I think for Classic, it's in a much more healthy way because I feel like you're just in more control for the reason that you log in, because as far as timers are concerned, really all that it has are weekly raids and some profession cooldowns here and there if you picked them, but by today's standards, that's pretty tame. I know that Rotan isn't specifically talking about timers here, but I do think that they're really at the core of why everything is go, 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 like he's saying. It's not that people have necessarily lost the desire to explore, it's that due to how these games are structured and how much pressure that these timers bring, people have simply lost the capacity because it's, well, this is nice, but this thing I initially came here for resets tomorrow, and my wife is going to get home in 30 minutes. These little exploration moments that he's talking about often happen when players are doing other things. So, for instance here, why was he in Ironforge in the first place? Well, maybe to train, maybe professions, maybe the auction house. I do think that there are explorer types who they just kind of, explore. They just go around in a zone trying to find all these nooks and crannies, but I think the general populace, what the case is most of the times is they just get sidetracked. But it's hard to get sidetracked now and smell the roses when your game time is mandated first by all of these timers, and then after you do your chores, you've earned the freedom in this video game to do what you want.
What do you mean? Now we can finally play the game. Oh yeah.
You have to earn the ability to do what you want today. Perfect example here, and I love Majora's Mask. It is a classic and it's great for many reasons, but one of the reasons why I preferred Ocarina of Time is that I don't like timers in video games generally. I mean, there are some exceptions, but timers are stressful. We already race against the clock in every aspect of our lives.
Coming to bed, honey?
Yes, dear.
You have to get to work on time, you have to cook dinner at these hours, and you want to get to bed at a reasonable time. You know what I mean? I feel like Ocarina was more fun for me because there was room for moments in Hyrule Field to just kind of explore. That's pretty important for an adventure game, the ability and freedom to explore. So that's what I say. Give me freedom. Give me freedom to immerse myself into this world that you've crafted. And I think that's true for RPGs as well. So I think that this obsession with daily and weekly timers that the genre has fallen under kind of betrays why video games exist in the first place. It's for leisure, reduced pressure, and you lose this as soon as you're compelled to play for any reason other than pure natural willpower. So you may be asking, okay, well, why do they exist then? Surely game developers, people who've dedicated their entire lives to game design realize this. But the issue is that on paper, these dailies and weeklies look very good because metrics-wise, they have a good retention rate, but a good retention rate does not equal good retention. If your player feels like a prisoner, eventually they'll get burnt out, and I think that was the main reason with BFA, and I think that's what really separates good developers from bad ones. I think that a good developer looks at a retention rate that is lower, but overall is more healthy because the only motivation to play is from the player. They're not pressured into playing. And I think a bad developer looks at this retention rate of BFA and they think to themselves, wow, people really love island expeditions and warfronts. People must love Torghast, they're in it every week. Well, yeah, of course they are, because now that you've twisted their arm into doing them, because that's your method of character progression, what, are people just not going to get legendaries and Shadowlands? I don't think that dailies and weeklies are 100% bad. I think that they can be good if they aren't in excess, and maybe they aren't so crucial for character progression. You know, just little things that encourage a little bit of activity, but I think it's so easy to go overboard and to really over-rely on them because you lose what Rotan is saying here. At a certain point, it starts to feel less and less like a game and more like an obligation.
Warrior, and I had no clue what I was doing, but I did know one thing. I loved being engrossed in the world. I would go into every building in Ironforge just to look around and think how cool it might be to just hang out here with friends and talk. Not questing, not leveling, not gearing, just hanging out in a cool secluded place in Ironforge talking about life. Same thing for...
So I actually talk about this in another video I'm working on, which has to do with the social nature of MMOs. I think it should be on the channel by the time I post this, but many people today comment on how antisocial MMOs are, and they're right. It's transformed into a very antisocial genre compared to what it once was. And one of the reasons for this is this tunnel vision on goals, on everything must have an immediate short-term reward or else it shouldn't exist. And the sad thing is, communicating and interacting with your fellow player is one of these things. In World of Warcraft's case, and a lot of these games, not to pick on WoW too much here, but you don't need to interact with anyone to experience the bulk of the game. You can raid through some raid finding system, dungeon through dungeon finder, level because there's no group quests, never party because mob takes share, there's no difficulty in figuring out how to do something, everything has waypoints. You can play near the entire game and get 95% of the experience without ever speaking to another soul. I think that one of the very core pillars of the MMORPG, which is its social nature, has been optimized out because it's not immediately apparent what value other players can bring. It's kind of strange if you think about it. It's a genre of game that no one wants to play alone, as in you're the only player on the server, but still, people play the game as if that were the case. Because again, social interaction is simply seen as inconvenient and therefore it should be avoided and removed. Anything inconvenient must be destroyed. Most everything that you get in these expansions is transitory. Gear becomes outdated, mounts become farmable and less rare, as do tough achievements, but friends persist. I met people in a Gnomeregan run in 2005 that I still play with today, and again, how can you say that that's not valuable? Once more, I think that's what really makes the great designers stand out, are those who are able to look past this surface level of activity equals tangible reward, and they're able to see the intangible in things that don't show up in a spreadsheet. And this isn't even from a wholesome perspective. Don't get me wrong, it may sound wholesome, but it's actually quite the opposite. I do believe that it's financially lucrative as it's easier to retain players with friends. You've probably heard me say this in recent videos. One of the most effective ways of retaining players in these MMOs is to make it such that if they're thinking of quitting, they're not just walking away from a video game, they're walking away from this fun activity with their friends every weekend. So many people play these MMOs because their friends are playing it, and if their friends were to all quit, that'd be it for them. They would unsubscribe along with them, so social ability and the game sort of pushing people together to interact with each other to create opportunities to make friends. I think that's really a lost art within the genre because it's seen as inconvenient, but from a player experience standpoint and even from a financial standpoint, I think it's a huge blind spot in the industry.
This random building in Orgrimmar. I barely made it to level 20 on that first character, but I probably explored most of the entire world map, and I can still remember the awe I felt when I accidentally stumbled into the burning steps by walking through the broken gate in the north of Red Ridge Mountains, and suddenly I arrived in Fire and Brimstone. Seeing the...
Very true. Another thing that was very effective in this, and it's so small that you wouldn't even think about it, but flight paths. The fact that the flight paths actually physically took you from point A to point B, and you got to look down at all of these high-level zones with these skull-level mobs, these intimidating areas, the elite drakes from Stormwind to Ironforge. This is what you call world presence, and for many players, this was their moment where they said, "Whoa, this is cool." This really is an online virtual world. It's massive. There are people everywhere. They're all doing their own thing. It's persistent. Even when I'm offline, something is happening. It was intriguing. It was fresh. It was exciting. And because of this, it was immersive.
blackened, smoky sky and the lava pouring from the mountains was amazing, and seeing the creatures and dragons that roamed the land made me excited to eventually come back and quest here, which I never did. Oops. But I do still remember that feeling, the wonder and the awe at every zone and every turn. And now I'm so familiar with every zone that I got...
Yeah, it made you want to play. It made you want to level so you could see the next zone, so you could see the next dungeon, and to explore the unexplored.
Gotta admit, I'm pretty killer at WoW GeoGuessr. So that begs the question, is this just a nostalgia thing? And I don't think so, as classic WoW and Season of Discovery in particular still have their moments of invoking wonder in me more so than modern WoW. And I think what it comes down to is the idea of a game being just that, a game. The process of not needing to follow an ideology of good game design, or retention practices, or meaningful progression systems, or balance. In the many empty buildings in each capital city, I feel the echoes of players and guilds that came before and probably hung out within their walls chatting in-game rather than using something like Discord to do voice chat. And even beyond the...
Oh, same. Every time I take that ride in the Deep Run tram, I think of that beautiful Dwarven hand cannon. Funny he mentions Discords here and the social ability of the game. This is another thing that has really worn away at the social fabric of the MMO. It's how social media has evolved around it, and because of this, they've really lost a lot of the uniqueness they once held. In the early 2000s, it was so interesting and new and unique to interact with strangers on the internet. But now, between YouTube and Twitch, Reddit, Discord, Instagram, and social media as a whole, it's really lost a lot of this unique appeal. And also, like he said, there will be in-game discussions now take place on these third-party websites. And hot take here, I don't even think that this is self-contained within the gaming community. It's life. You know, the rise of social media has sort of trained people that if what you do doesn't get 100 likes on fucking Instagram, that must mean that that thing doesn't have value. So many people attach their value to their online presence and how many likes they get. And believe me when I tell you, having done YouTube so intensely for 10 years this year, it's a horrible way to live and to look at life. Remember to stop and smell the roses, not just in video games, but in your personal life as well. I really do think that myself and a lot of you guys watching, according to my age demographics, that we're really part of the last of a unique generation where we experienced life as kids before the internet, back when we used to go outside, and then witnessing that transition to the digital age and the rise of the internet and social media and the online world opening up. I think it's pretty easy for us to see how the younger generation can get so caught up and consumed in the digital world that they forget to enjoy the simplicity in life. And I think that we're guilty of that ourselves sometimes as well. But because we lived during a time before social media kind of took over, it's sort of a way that we can ground ourselves and remind ourselves to enjoy the simple things and get back to the basics and enjoying the beauty and simplicity in not just video games, but in life itself. I do. I think that it's harder for someone who is raised on social media to see that, and I think that's why people act so crazy these days and they get so caught up in stuff that ultimately doesn't matter and has no real consequence in your life. You know, these terminally online people who believe that people in real life behave as if they do on social media. They just get so out of touch and so consumed with it. I think that we really are the last generation to know that. I think that life today is way more complex than it used to be. But yeah, take a moment to call your mom and dad, give them a hug. There's no daily quest for that. There's no experience gain or gold to be earned, but it doesn't mean it's not worth doing. So be grateful for that. Be grateful for being a part of what could be the last generation to truly grasp the beauty and simplicity because we actually experienced it.
Capital cities, there are empty vistas in areas of the game that some may consider useless or poorly designed that were really just there to add flavor for those who wanted it. And even endgame raids in classic WoW like Molten Core didn't feel as immediately pressing to complete as soon as you could. I mean, there wasn't always a world-ending catastrophe just on the other side if you didn't hurry up and progress through the raid. In modern WoW, there is a greater
This is another thing that I personally would attribute to the makeup of the player base. At this point in vanilla, people were more focused on leveling and just sort of exploring the genre. But now, as the player base has aged and we've become more familiar and more skilled, more knowledgeable, they're much more aware of how these MMOs are structured. You know, it's level, dungeon, raid, and we're on like expansion number 10 at this point. So that's why I say that if MMOs are to become as popular as they once were, there needs to be one that breaks this mold. There needs to be one where players expect the normal formula and they get surprised and intrigued. And I think that answer lies in Sandbox, since it's a much less explored subgenre. Since World of Warcraft found the magic theme park formula, it's been emulated hundreds of times. There's really not much room for innovation in theme park. And I think that going back to Sandbox and focusing on player-made content instead of developer-made content is the only thing that can reintroduce the intrigue and mystery and uniqueness that the genre once held.
Emphasis on the critical path and on progression for the sake of story, and in a sense, I get it. You have to keep the players engaged, you have to keep the stakeholders happy, and you need to constantly have high stakes. Unfortunately, Blizzard already crossed the border of highest stakes of all time with the Shadowlands expansion and the universe-ending Jailer. I mean, how can you create another engaging story without putting the universe at stake again? But
yeah, and that's the problem, once again, with these Marvel-like, grandiose, epic, world-shattering storylines where the player is this ultimate savior and badass of the world, best friends with Khadgar, best friends with Magni. It just doesn't work in an MMO because not only is it multiplayer, it's hard to be the savior of the world when everyone else is, but you also paint yourself into a corner because how do you top that? We also went over this in the Jimmy video that these storylines become so convoluted, the game can't even deliver them in a comprehensive way anymore at this point with the Chromie time, and how it just rushes you out of expansions before the story is even concluded. So, as far as I'm concerned, it's all the more reason to make the focus of the game to be the world, and the player to be this nameless foot soldier in it.
that's just the point for me. I don't want another universe-ending, world-ending, or even continent-ending storyline. I want a lived-in world with smaller, more meaningful bite-sized stories that are fun to explore. I don't want a fresh new continent where it feels like nobody's ever been there before. I want to feel as if I'm part of the world again, not the champion of Azeroth. I want
Oh, champion. I'll suck your dick for some Azerite, champion.
to walk around and explore the corners of each zone and building, not for a reward or a secret, but for the fun of it. But the gaming landscape has changed. We don't need to talk using in-game chat anymore. Discord has a great interface, a bunch of communities, and it's easier than ever to voice chat with your friends. Back in the day, having a TeamSpeak or Vent server was a big deal, and having good enough internet to run that at the same time as playing World of Warcraft was an even bigger deal. Stereotypically nowadays, gamers are painted as these nitro-fueled, energy drink-chugging, RGB lighting enthralled adult children, and to pander
Hell yeah, brother.
to that stereotype, we need flashy games that pack a punch and better pack one quick before your captive audience chooses one of a million other games promising the same thing. But there
Exactly. Be the one that does something different. But unfortunately, the issue here is that, and we'll see if he gets into it here, it's just money. MMOs cost too much to make, so it's a genre dominated by AAA, and AAA is too scared to risk it. from what we've seen over the past couple of decades, we see innovation from indie, and then AAA just sort of builds upon it. That's why the landscape has been theme park since World of Warcraft took off. They've been trying to recapture this magic in their own slightly different ways, not understanding that the landscape of the player base has changed since then, and a lot of this uniqueness to the genre no longer exists due to the evolution of social media and also the players at an individual level. I think that the answer does lie in Sandbox, and just having things for the sake of having things, like you said, and focusing on player-made content and getting out of this tunnel vision of dopamine rush. But the only developer who would do that is indie, and I think it's just too expensive of a genre for indie, so unless we get some billionaire to fund it, I just don't really think it's going to happen, unfortunately.
There's another catch. They're all promising the same thing. How awesome would it be to finally have a World of Warcraft expansion or experience with a slower pace, a chiller vibe, and some good old fun exploration? And no, I'm not talking about the cozy game genre, which, side note, it's probably growing fast because more people are wanting that type of vibe, but I don't want WoW to be a farming sim or an idle game. I would want the upcoming WoW expansions to feel like classic WoW and Season of Discovery in their pacing. Slowed down, less high stakes, less flashy lights, less progression systems, with more corners to explore, whether they're empty or not. I don't have a...
What do you guys think of an expansion where instead of taking days to level, it takes months? Like, let's say there's not even a raid ready at release. Let's say they put all of that effort into making these enormous zones and this really, really intense leveling campaign and all of this work back into the world where the average player takes maybe 2-3 months to level. I think that it would be an interesting idea, but the issue here is that if we're going to speak World of Warcraft here, is that retail over the course of the past decade or so has really kind of cultivated this dopamine motivated player base. I remember this, and I think it was a little after I quit because people send me stuff all the time. There was like this slime cat that was data mined to be a reward for a Shadowlands raid, and it happened to be obtainable in LFR mode. And as it turned out, shortly before the patch, they changed it to normal mode, and people flipped out. Like, they were irate. At first glance, I think it's pretty unreasonable. I mean, Blizzard, from what I understand, never said, hey, this is going to be in LFR mode. It was data mined, so I really kind of looked at it as people unfairly assuming that data mines are finished products. And, I mean, come on, it's normal mode. It's really not that big of a deal. But thinking about it more, this is the player base that they've cultivated. By making every single thing in the game so accessible for over a decade, of course, there's going to be this expectation that everything is going to continue to be accessible, even if it means that items that could actually be unique and hold value turn into just another incrementation in a mount collection that nobody will ever use. So whenever I see people suggest these pretty radical changes, or if I suggest them myself, I always kind of think of the Slime Cat incident, and if people are going to go nuclear over an LFR mount, what do you think the reaction will be if they make leveling take more than 3 days? They'd go postal. How can you repair the social fabric if people go fucking ballistic over having to do a normal mode raid for an optional mount?
Proposed solution, and I'm not saying by any means I hate World of Warcraft now or that I'm quitting retail. No, none of that. I just wanted to throw my hat and my feelings into the ring, and I'm sure some of you out there would feel the same. I still like to just sit on the cliffs of Thunderbluff and look out on Mulgore. I still like to hear the music of Elwyn Forest and Stormwind as I'm strolling through. And sometimes, even as a heroic raider in Dragonflight, I still like to RP walk. And I hope that I'm not alone in saying I miss when games were games and we would play just for fun. Thanks for watching, and take care.
What a casual. Good video here by Rotan. I agree with a lot of points. I don't know, maybe I'm a bit jaded, but I just think between the evolution of everything around the genre and the lack of creative integrity and innovation by AAA, and the fact that the player base doesn't really care, it's probably easier to dodge rain than it is to steer the ship back into the right direction. I think that there is enjoyment to be had from MMOs. I mean, I'm still playing Classic, so clearly I enjoyed enough to keep playing it, but I do think that, the genre is in a tough spot, and I really think that the answer lies in indie if someone is willing to take a gamble and find a formula that's aged better than the theme park. But yeah, anyways, go subscribe to Rotan. He's a newer content creator, it looks like, so I'm sure he'd appreciate the support. Anyways, other than that, like the video if you liked it, because I'll see you in the next one. Peace.
Farewell for now, mortals. We hope you enjoyed today's video. See you again soon.